right, you guys, we are welcoming our first guest here in Nashville, Tennessee, the one and only Miss Elizabeth Chen. Yeah.
What an honor.
We are
Thank
stoked.
you.
And we're so excited to be here in Nashville. I mean, I haven't been here in almost a decade, but you've called this place home for how long?
For 11 years now.
Wow.
Over a decade.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is something when you start living in a new place and you have to kind of get your feet wet and then start to understand the area and find your favorite food spots and stuff, that it just becomes your new home.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Where did you originally call home?
Originally New York City. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So I came from the Big Apple and eventually moved to Virginia and kept going further and further. So
The last time I was in New York, I think I was like on a band trip for high school, and I can remember being almost addicted to going out at night and just walking the streets
oh yeah,
and feeling the drive to want to succeed.
absolutely.
What takes you away from something like that?
I know. My parents wondered the same thing.
I mean, I loved it because I love to work.
Yeah.
But when I was out there, I mean, I don't know, 15.
Yeah.
And to be out there and be limited because they're like, you got a call time to get back to the hotel.
Right. Yeah.
I felt like if I lived here, I would work harder than I ever worked in my life.
Yeah. It's kind of electric, right? Like the whole productivity and go thing. It's a real thing in New York City.
So what took you from, or how long did you live there and then came?
Yeah. So I was born in Manhattan, grew up in Brooklyn. That was all that I knew. But the drive to want to be a musician was really the thing that, growing up, I would joke with my parents. I'd be like, one day I'm going to be in Nashville. One day I'm going to be in Nashville. And then you get to the point in like your high school-ish age where you're going, that's not realistic, right?
Yeah.
And you start making plans for, okay, I'm going to become a journalist. I'm going to get a business degree instead, like something that's a little bit more attainable. And that dream of Nashville kind of got put to the side, but it was always a little bit there, And I think what that motivation, that New York City way of living for me looked like was like, how do I learn as much as I can here? Because the diversity in New York City was amazing.
Yeah, it's through the roof.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like when you talk about the music culture there, it's not just one thing. Like Nashville is kind of like, okay, you got country music, and that's kind of the main thing. You go to downtown Broadway and everyone's playing country music, right?
Yeah.
But in New York City, it was like, you can have Latin going on, you can have hip hop going on, you can have jazz, and you had access to all of it. And everyone was like, we love all of these different things.
That's so cool. That's so cool. You can pull from different areas, and you go down one restaurant or pub, and you hear something else, and you're like, man, I want to go. And you just have an itch for something else, and that probably fueled you as a player to want to play country, pop, rock, jazz, because you heard all these great influences. You just pull from all these different aspects and put them in your tool belt.
Absolutely. And honestly, my drum teacher was the biggest proponent of that. I wasn't necessarily, obviously, growing up and being too young to go into the bars and, hear all the different styles of music. I wasn't getting exposed to that at the venues, but I was through my drum teacher who was like, hey, here's a mixtape of this, and here's a mixtape of that. And he would literally bring me through books that was like, 1 week we're focusing on a Latin groove, the next week we're focusing on a hip hop groove, the next rock.
Yes.
So that was really where I got exposed to all of that.
And what, like, if you could remember like these mixtapes, like what were like the top three they like really gravitated towards your style?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I will say number one for me was Avril Lavigne.
Oh.
Yeah. That's a
right
banger.
there.
I was obsessed.
Hit my heart.
Like, this was the album that, your parents go, you're listening to what?
Rebellion, right? Like straight rebellion. Yeah.
Shut your room door.
Yeah.
And then I had a mixtape of like Blink 182.
There you go.
Nickelback was on there. Creed was on there.
Oh yeah. The Creed.
Yes.
The Creed, yeah. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what is this
Yeah.
stuff? And
Felt so alive, huh?
yeah, absolutely. Like it was back in the day where you would carry a physical CD player.
Oh, dude.
Like my first purchase that I saved up for was an iRiver CD player.
Wow.
I remember being like, Mom, Dad, I'm saving up $170 for
Dang. 170 for a CD
For a
player.
CD
That's
player.
unreal. I remember mine like $29.99. Like But when you knocked it, like, because back then you would fit them in your pants. So you had this like circular round disc.
Yeah.
And it was like you knew you were jamming when somebody just had the whole thing coming out.
Yeah.
And I remember, so let me see here. Let me date myself. Like, I remember my first CD being the BC Boys. I think it was like the Five Boroughs,
Okay,
right?
yeah,
Right?
uh-huh.
So Check It Out. That was the first song. I remember MTV running that. And in that run of songs from that CD, to this day, I think back and I'm like, there was something in the music back then. And there was also something about just having that tangible music in your hand.
Absolutely.
That made you go, I think I'm going to know what kind of day I'm having today because I'm going to put this on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And you treasured it more, right?
100%.
I remember going on road trips and being like, what 10 CDs do I want to put in my little
Right?
jacket?
The zip.
Exactly. Because you couldn't take your whole collection. That would be way too many CDs, way too heavy. But you could take the, CDs out of their jackets and put it in your little portable thing.
Yeah.
And that was like such a process for me,
Yeah.
I think when I try to think back on what made life simple back then was definitely the CD player, but it was also where you took the music and where it took you.
Yeah.
I think for me also was that original Blink-182 self-titled record, and thinking back to those days, I just wish there was more of a tangible way of having music in life nowadays. Where it's like, yes, you'll go see a show and you'll have it actually has come back, the physical records.
Yeah, for sure.
But we're not taking those in the car or anything. We're at home.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a little bit more like the accessibility is amazing. And I'm thankful that we have that. But you almost take it for granted.
Oh, definitely.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, I loved the days of just really getting into a record. And because you oftentimes, if you're driving somewhere, you only had that one record with you, you would put it on repeat,
Yeah.
And depending on what earphones you got, like, I remember my iRiver, I was like buying battery extensions for it. You'd be like, yes, I got the extension pack where I could put the AA batteries and then listen for 2 more hours.
And so something like that, even, I don't know, I guess I can think back and the type of CD players that I was used to carrying around were the ones that would get knocked and the CD would come off and it was just like, I lost the track. So I was like, okay, I guess I got to restart it.
Yeah.
And nowadays it's just like, oh, let me just grab my finger and just rewind it.
Right.
And I'm like, there was something about the simple times in life that were
Yeah.
harder but better.
Right. Or, your CD would get scratched and you'd be so bummed out. And so you literally took care of your music better.
You used to appreciate it better.
Yeah.
Nowadays, if you can just hit your finger, you're
Oh,
like, you're not.
Uh-huh.
I remember back in the day, like whenever we had those flip phones, and
Yes.
I'm only 24, right? But I just remember having to like listen to the computer speakers
Yeah.
and then recording a ringtone with like the message thing
Yes,
and then saving it for everybody's individual contact. It was like just the worst audio, just.
Oh, yeah.
That's like a.
But the ringtone was your pride and joy.
Correct. That's the next thing. Yes. So like I remember specifically I had friends that were assigned specific ringtones. So when I heard this song, when I heard like
knew it was.
when I heard Metallica or Pantera coming, oh, that's my homie. I'm picking up the phone right now.
Yeah. Or if someone had a lame ringtone, you were like, oh,
No.
no.
I'm
This
not
guy
answering
again.
that. Yeah. Oh man, I wish those days were still around for me. The ringtone days.
Yes.
But back to the one thing about the New York thing I was going to bring up was how close were you like in like the scene of playing in New York, like Blue Note and all of these legendary venues? Like, was that something that you gravitated towards a lot, or were you more so outside the city playing other types of venues?
Where I really cut my teeth was in the church environment.
Oh, wow.
So I, obviously being too young, and I have a funny story about trying to sneak into a 21 and up music venue when I was a kid. Like most venues in New York City were like either 18 and up or 21 and up. So since I left at 18, I really didn't get to experience that, right? But where I really experienced musicality and, diversity in music culture was in church.
I mean, I think Chris can talk on that a lot. Like he plays and
Did you guys have like a lot of like guest like worship leaders that would come and you'd be like in the house band and it's like, hey, like learn these couple songs?
Not necessarily within my church, but when I got to high school, I was being invited to play at at different places. So
Conferences.
yeah, for sure. Or even like, hey, the church in Queens was curious if you could fill in for this Sunday, and you'd go there and it's like, oh, all of these songs are like Israel Houghton songs, and
Yeah.
I'm having to dive into a little bit more of that gospel side of things. Or, oh, at my church we play Hillsong, so
Yeah.
you're kind of moving into different spaces.
Yeah.
And that's really where I learned about diversity in music cultures.
And it's funny because there's so many worship leaders out there these days, and everybody does Bethel, everybody does Hillsong, but each worship leader has their own way of doing that song.
Right.
They might be like, "Hey man, let's take that bridge out here." Like, "Oh well, last Sunday I played 6 bridges." No man, we're only doing one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Or like, hey, let's reharm this, and then we want the drums to
Yeah.
accent that hit,
yeah, catching the vocal hits, or
Yeah.
making some keyboard lines and stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's where I learned a lot of this, like, all right, spontaneity and like
Yes.
just listening to the vocal, being able to flow with the band.
Yeah, and I think Chris kind of talking about that a lot to me personally was understanding just as an MD at a church, you really understand the dynamic more than anything. You're not even really understanding maybe more of everybody else's parts rather than your own.
Yeah.
And you really dive into, okay, he was talking to me the other day about pitches.
Yeah.
And he's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
hey guys, we're in G and you're singing in B over here. Like, come on, like get it together. And I was like, wow, like even as an MD and you're sitting back there going, I actually have to listen to everybody else.
Yes.
Makes you a
I
great
don't
musician.
even have drums in my mix.
Yeah.
I have everybody else turned up. I have no drums. I don't like it. And people are like, what the heck? I don't want them. I don't. I know what my floor tom sounds like.
Right.
I know what my ride sounds like, but I don't know what that bass sounds like.
Absolutely.
That's what I need.
Yes. And that's the interesting thing about even talking about modern mixes, right? A lot of times drummers are like, okay, let's put drums all the way up. And similar to you, while I do have some drums in my mix, I'm going, I need the lead vocal.
Yes.
I want to hear that. And a lot of drummers will take it out thinking like, oh, it picks up cymbal bleed and I don't really need the lead vocal, right?
That's your guide, though.
But that's your guide. That tells you where the dynamics are moving, right?
Yes.
And if I'm not listening to the lead vocal, I'm missing out on something that's actually cueing me of where we need to go.
Yes. Yeah. I'm real picky on like my keyboard players. Like sometimes like I'll be like, hey man, that sounds great, but I need a different patch. And they're like, oh. I'm like, I need a different patch, bro.
Yeah,
you know, like.
And that's what makes a great MD. You're listening and you're going, okay, how does this work within the context of everything?
Yes.
Not just the individual
Yeah. And
instruments.
I think as musicians, like we're all like, look at this new lick I learned, or look at this new chop I learned, right? And it's like, but does that really fit the music in that church? Does that fit the congregation? Because as an MD, you're picking songs, you're picking arrangements. Like I would love to add some hits, right?
Yeah.
Like the congregation be like, all right. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Totally, yeah.
But at another church, like you said, like that might work at a church on the south side, versus over here.
Right, absolutely. And even in the context of like the band, I get that individual musicians would be thinking, okay, what am I doing here to make it the coolest and bring all my skills to the table? But I think it really is the job of the MD to go, hey, okay, listen to this part really quick and then listen to this other musician. And you bring awareness. Like some of the biggest learning that I've done in band settings is when the MD has pulled me into the control room and said, hey, let's listen back on this. And I go into the control room and it's actually like, oh, wow, I didn't hear that string player was doing that part, right? And then the MD going, yeah, your fill was, I think it's cool there, but it kind of conflicts with the way that string part is hitting the rhythm,
Yeah.
And it could be as simple as like, I'm doing like, ba, 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 and he's just going like, I just need you to do simple build, know?
Yeah.
Like, let's not try to bring in all the, go around the kit type of fills. Let's just do a slow, like a steady build in that moment.
Yeah.
Because that's going to match the rhythm that's going on with the strings.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really harp on myself because I talk about this all the time. Like when I started producing, that's when my playing skyrocketed. When I could like sit there at home and like watch where my notes fell on the grid.
Yeah.
And then also in the context of music, being like, man, I can play a, Bagadagoon, right? And start on the rack tom, but why don't I start on the floor tom? Because that guitar line is low. He's lower on the neck.
Yeah.
And so sonically,
Right.
that's when you're like, okay, like,
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so being open to that type of critique too is so important.
Yeah.
I think that was where just recently I had tried out at a church locally in Houston. And when I went in there, I had picked the song that I had first walked in and heard there because it just moved me personally, and it was "No One Like the Lord."
Yeah.
When I went in there and played, and I tried out for it, I had it in my ears, but I was expecting a full band tryout.
Yeah.
And they were like, "You're just gonna play it, and you're gonna just cover it."
Okay.
I was like, "That's the craziest, like most simplest tryout I've ever done in my life for anything."
Yeah.
Where it's literally like I'm still playing it in my room, just covering it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember that when I saw it live, not only was the room sonically just dynamically made for good sound, but the musicians themselves, you could tell from one service of somebody playing it to another drummer playing it, and you talk about those builds, you talk about the different washes, because I think in modern worship music you see more washing and more building than anything, right? And it's important to be very like not only strategic but dynamic in that build.
Yeah.
It's almost what makes or breaks a song, I would say, in that reference of dynamics.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And talk about in the, church setting, you really are listening to where the worship leader is going. And being in tune with, okay, how can I both be confident in where I'm moving the dynamics, right? Because in many ways the drums do lead, but at the same time, considering, do we have room to build here, or am I going too far, too fast,
Yeah.
I would say, like, especially when you get first into just even playing drums, I think just for me, like, everybody starts out differently. You mentioned like having an instructor.
Yeah.
And did you come up with having that instructor just at home and then gradually building up in school and playing in drumline and percussion and concert and all of that kind of thing? Like,
Yeah, so I actually didn't do any of that,
wow.
which
Really?
I feel kind of sad about now. I wish that I had that marching band or like, some type of jazz band background.
I totally expected like a snare playing.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh my
I
gosh.
expected that.
Yeah, I
Wow.
wish that
Wow.
I did.
Symphonic band stuff.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
No, I mean, I look at what those guys do and I'm like, this is unbelievable. And I
Yeah.
wish I had those chops under my hands.
That's a different beast to be able to sight read stuff like that.
Yes.
Like I remember high school being like, oh, I don't want to play.
Yeah.
We had to play like marimba or xylophone. I'm like, this is dumb, man. I just want to play drum set.
Yeah.
And then I went to PASIC. And then
Yeah.
I saw like Bob Becker
Oh
play.
my gosh, yeah.
And I was like, okay, that's a different beast.
That's a different beast. I mean, there are guys here like Scott Williamson. I sat in on a session that he was playing, and the way that they can read charts is just like,
Yeah.
I learned that early on when I was in, like, I guess my story was my dad's a guitar player, and anything from like Stevie Ray Vaughan to Sade, Pantera, all of it. He just threw it anything he could in front of me, and he originally wanted me to start playing guitar. Soon found out, even with an instructor, I had no way of learning how to play guitar. Set me in front of some drums. We had a little home studio at the time, and he was like, "Okay, you're a drummer."
Yeah.
Found me an instructor at the school, and I was like trying out. But at that day and age, like 6th grade, you had everybody that wanted to play drums.
Right.
It was the cool thing.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll never forget it. Like, I had already been playing at home on the drum set. So I go after hours to try out. He's like, my son is going to play drums.
Yeah.
He's going to do it.
Yeah.
I'll never forget this. Like, it's ingrained in my mind. I've forgotten everything else in those years, but the one thing I'll always remember is sitting down in front of this instructor, and because my dad put all of that music in front of me, and I always listened to it and covered it by listening and paying attention to those dynamics.
Yeah.
When that instructor sat in front of me and was like, "Okay, play what I can play,"
Yeah.
he sat in front of me with a pad, simple, just paradiddle stuff, and I was like, I looked at him like, there you go. Like, and he's like, oh.
Yes.
And then kept upping it, and I was like, I got you. Like, let's
Yes.
keep going.
Yeah.
He's like, well, I guess your son's in. To this day, I've kept up with some of those people, but I'm still the only one from that group who kept playing drums.
Wow.
And if that would have never happened, if my dad would have never stood up and been like, no, my son's going to play drums, I don't know if I would be right here.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where you look at like what your parents put in front of you and like how they find those instructors. And I think instruction is, it's almost, you're losing it nowadays.
Yeah.
You're losing those like finite people that have the grit of understanding
Yes.
what it means to break down dynamics
Yeah.
and like understand your hands.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that is just very underappreciated
Yeah.
in today's world.
Yeah. Your dad saw natural talent within you, but then he also saw, hey, there's something that we can do to help train this and build this.
Something to me, it was just like I just felt like it was him telling me like, okay, you're not going to play guitar, you're going to play something, because he wanted someone to jam with at the end of the day, you know.
Truthfully, yeah.
And we have pictures, right? Like I have a crazy story on how I actually went out and bought like my own little Flying V when I was like 9 or 10, you know, saved up back in the day, saved up cans and took them to the and traded them, right? You know, for money from the aluminum place and stuff. So I had a love for it, but I just didn't understand the mechanics.
Yeah.
So, but when he put sticks in my hand, he's like, no, you are 100% a drummer. And I'll never forget before I had gotten into 6th grade, there was like a bar down the street that they would always play at. And I don't know how, I don't remember how I showed up at this place, but my dad ends up getting me in there and has me sitting in on Leonard Skinner's Simple Man.
Amazing.
And those are the only 2 memories that I can remember from back then really well. But it's always about what you're influenced by, not only music wise, but then who's supporting you. Because as a kid, you're a sponge.
Yes.
You're taking it all in.
Yeah.
And sitting in there and listening to the players, because I had never done that in my life.
Yes.
I'd never played a show. I was like, Dad, what are you doing? Like, I don't even know why I'm here. It's a bar. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And I love the fact, to this day, I shout out Dad, like straight up.
Absolutely.
I would not be the player I am, turning into a hired gun and doing all these things, being able to sit in with musicians I've never felt or never met, and never even knew their set list.
Yeah.
Because it's that ability to be able to sit in with musicians and then like not only watch but just listen to that. And where are they going with the song?
Absolutely.
Maybe I don't even know the cover, but I can understand the dynamic of how they're playing.
Yes. Yeah. And you take the combination of being good at listening, and then you put technique and you put, formal training behind that, and it's like unbelievable. Like you're a superhuman at that point.
How did you pick that up between like not having that exposure to drumline and all that kind of stuff, but you had the fundamentals?
Right. Yeah. So I had this unbelievable teacher, and I mean, talk about giving kudos to someone that just was able to see a talent and call it out and be willing to sacrifice for it. I'm so thankful that this guy, his name's Paul, and he, at the time when I was starting to learn, like I'm 8 or 9 when I'm starting to learn drums, right? And I take a liking to this instrument. We ended up inheriting this old drum kit from a church that my dad had pastored at, right? So it's in our living room at this point, and I'm like, ooh, cool, let me tap around. I go, I think I want to take drum lessons. And so, went to my mom and dad, and I was like, hey, there's this amazing drum teacher. Can we get lessons with him? And my parents crunched the numbers, and they're like, we don't have the budget for it, That's just like way out of our budget.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of disappointed. But then I know of this kid at our church that was taking drum lessons from that teacher. And so I have this bright idea of going to this kid. And, when you're 8 or 9 years old, you think of a 17-year-old, which was the age that he was at. You think of a 17-year-old as like full-grown adult. Like, this is so intimidating. I'm about to ask Paul, can he give me drum lessons, But I did. One Sunday I came up to him and I was like, hey, I know that you're taking drum lessons from so-and-so. Would you just be willing to like teach me some things? And he was like, yeah, totally. He was like, I take lessons on Saturday. I see you on Sundays. I'll just teach you everything that I learned from my drum lessons.
That's cool.
And so he did that from the time I was 8 until the time I was 18 years old.
Wow.
10 years
10 years.
of the Saturday thing taking it into the Sunday. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
And just like free drum lessons.
Wow.
He would take notes on whatever he was learning and be like, all right, here's what I learned. Here's the beat that you can practice. Eventually his drum teacher found out, and his drum teacher was like, I'm cool with it, whatever. If you're,
You've been taking my material over the last 10 years.
Exactly. He was like, fine, you can just copy and, paste it onto whatever you give to her.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. I mean, Chris, how would you say like growing up and like I feel like it's either or both. You either get the fundamentals or you get just thrown in the pit and you're just like, go and play.
Yeah.
Man, it's funny because kind of like you were talking about where I had a drum teacher. Shout out Ernie, my boy Ernie.
Yeah.
He went to my grandparents' church, and he was just a drummer, but he was so good.
Yeah.
And he toured and stuff, played in New Orleans with his dad, and had been in a bunch of wedding bands and stuff. And it was so cool to see him take the time to come over and teach me, like same thing. Here's a paradiddle, here's a double stroke roll, all these things, and like I could do it, but like I didn't really understand it. And he took the time to really break it down and say, okay, here's why this is like this. Here's why this is this. And then eventually I got another drum teacher and started, kind of playing around town at like, 14 or 15. But I think the most impactful moments were when some of my older buddies, they would pick me up and say, hey, man, I'm going to come bring you to this gig. And they put a chair next to their drums. And they wouldn't ever really say anything, but they would just let me watch.
Yes.
And I learned so much from just sitting there just being like, okay, why did he play that cymbal versus that cymbal?
Yep.
Okay, why did he bring that tom versus that tom? What made him do that? And like those were some of the most impactful moments of my life. And now that I teach full-time at Guitar Center in Houston, like I love it. And I tell my kids, I say, hey, they're like, oh, Mr. Chris, I couldn't make drum lessons this week because I had, soccer practice. I say, okay, no worries. I have a gig this weekend. Your homework is to come to that gig.
Yeah.
And they sit down and like, man, this was so great. And their parents just get to see their eyes light up. And that's how I was. And I'm like, man, like, I'm like doing something for these kids. And that to me is more impactful than writing on a whiteboard. Here's an eighth note.
Right. For sure. Because you're actually putting it into real like time for them, like you're actually applying it and showing them how to apply it.
And I'll be blunt, there's a lot of stuff that you can write a ton of music and all this, literature on a whiteboard, but there is so many things that you can physically not write out.
Yeah.
And those are the things that to me separate like the boys from the men.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Or the girls from the women in your case, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And, right. And I mean, I'll make a point on that too, because you start to get into the world of, okay, the drum world, right? Like, I think it's more custom for the male figures to be wanting to play drums. Tell your story on that, because just the ambition alone to be 8 years old and go, hey, not only you're approaching a 17-year-old guy that's like, hey, I want you to teach me drums, but I think it's so applaudable for him to be like, 8-year-old girl wants to learn how to play drums. Like, I'm going to do it. Like, I'm going to take the time.
He could have definitely just blew you off.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, talk about ambition, but also just a drive from your case to be like, I'm going to do something that is out of the norm. And did you have other female drummers that you were actually looking up to at that point, or was there?
Yeah, not at that point. If I'm being honest, I think the one thing that was my motivation was to be competitive with my brother.
Yeah, there you go. Was he also a musician?
Yeah.
Was he?
He was playing piano at the time and guitar.
Yeah.
And I didn't even have the thought of like, I'm going to be that girl that can play drums. It was just, I got to do this so I could be better than my brother.
Love it. I didn't have that competitive rivalry with my brother. He wasn't really a musician.
Okay.
He had some saxophone when he started growing up and getting into band, but it was always that, for me, it was like going to shows with my dad, seeing bands. Like, was there ever a time where you were like going to shows and like being inspired by the musicians you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So talking about sneaking into a club in New York City.
Yeah.
So I think, let's see. I think around 14 or 15 years old, I want to say. Yeah, I think 15 years old. And my brother was 19 at the time. And there's a venue in New York City called the Highline Ballroom. And it's a beautiful venue. But it was one of those, I think it was like 18 and up or 21 and up venues. And Brooke Frazier was playing there. Yeah.
Okay.
And I was just like, man, how can I go to this show? And for whatever reason, I was really good at writing. And so I started like article writing. So I started reaching out to these publications and basically being like, hey, can I write this concert review for you? Hey, can I write this album review for you? And that was my way of getting free music at the time.
Wow.
Because, like CDs were like $12, right? And as a kid, I don't have $12. But when you write reviews, as long as you're good at it, they're not going, how old is this person behind the screen, right?
That's really cool. That just shows your determination.
I was determined.
To do the thing.
Yeah.
How old were you at that time?
So I started writing reviews when I was 13 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Wow. And that was my means of getting music because I couldn't afford to buy all of these CDs, you know. So within a couple of years, I've racked up like 300 CDs in my collection. Wow. And, you know, they're giving me the opportunity to go to these concerts and review them. And I'm thinking, okay, that would be my way around these like age limits, right?
Right.
So I just tried it one day. Like, I was like, hey, I'm so-and-so reviewing for this publication. Could you put me on the list for Media Pass? And sure enough, they did, and they did not ID check.
Wow. It pays to shoot your shot.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, I told my brother, I was just act cool, you know, and we like walked right in. And that was our way around it, you know. So that was like the exposure to some of the concerts, you know. It was going to the Knitting Factory.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with that. I'm familiar.
Yeah, and you know, like it's such a small venue, so like your ears are bleeding by the end of it. Especially we would go and like watch rock bands play. Yeah. But that was like so much a part of everything.
Who was big back then? Like, could you name some concerts that just stand out to you that you were like, okay, I have to like up my game, or I just want to do this more?
One that I can say I still so much respect to this day is Paramore.
Oh wow. Yeah. What year was this?
So I didn't actually see them play growing up, but even just watching videos of them play, and kind of once I moved to Nashville, I was like, oh wow, these like, they're legit, you know? And even before that, I remember back in like the MySpace days, I discovered an acoustic video of them playing Hallelujah, and just hearing the vocal range of Haley. And then also later on seeing their career progress and seeing what a performer Haley is.
Phenomenal. I've seen her a few times throughout the decade. You know, the interchanges of the members and all of that. And there's just something about the consistency that she provides in her vocal range. And that's something that I don't think listeners even think about. It's like, this person's been singing for this long and has never like lacked in that consistency.
Right. Yeah. I mean, she's jumping around stage. Yeah. She's like throwing her hair everywhere, and she is not faltering at all.
No. And they're from, she lives here.
Yeah, from Franklin.
Yeah. And I think even just the Nashville scene alone, like I lived in Austin for a few years, and you know, music capital of the world and all that. But as a hired gun and as someone that was going in there just like, I just want to work.
Yeah.
I then soon started to discover that the musicians that are really in that scene, they're cutting it up differently. Like they're living for it. Yeah. And they want it more than anybody. And that was where, okay, I'm working full time, but I'm also feel like I'm playing full time because I'm playing 3-4 nights a week out there. And that was where I started to understand, like, there's just a difference when you live for it. And you go for it every night. You know?
Absolutely. And it has to stay fun,
right?
Right.
Right.
Like if you were just hustling and you're burning yourself out and it was no longer fun, it really, like, it wouldn't be worth it. Yeah. Right.
Have you seen them live recently in
I
Paramore?
haven't seen them live recently, no.
Okay. When was the last time?
So, oddly enough, well, let me think here. I don't think I've actually been to a Paramore show. But so there was some overlap. She attended a church that I was playing at, and so I had been able to meet her through that. And then also, you know, obviously watching their career grow and seeing all the videos and everything, that really was like my only touch point with what they do. But I haven't actually gone out to a show. Got
to make that happen.
I need to.
We gotta put that in stick that in the ground today.
Absolutely.
Put it on the calendar.
Yeah.
Make time for that. When I saw them, I'll never forget when Aaron Glitzby was playing drums for them, and just the power that he brings to the table. Yeah. I can remember seeing those Gretsch drums up there, and I did not realize who was playing drums for them at the time. I just, my friend in Austin was like, hey, I have a free ticket to Paramore tonight. Do you want to go? I was like, yeah, I'll drive out. Like, let's go. And I remember seeing the Gretsch drums up there, and I'm like, this isn't right.
Yeah.
I know that that's a different guy.
Yeah.
And when I saw the player, I was like, and I saw the hair just in the front of the face. I was like, it's Aaron. It has to be Glitzby.
Right. Yeah.
And I think he's here in Nashville as well.
I think he is.
Yeah. And just another one of those performers where you're like, they live it, they know it, they love it. Yeah. And whenever I saw that show, I was just like, my gosh, like the consistency that these performers and to her credit, to Haley's credit, she's finding the performers that really match
Yes.
what they put on that stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, like their original drummer, Zach, who was back with them.
Right,
Unbelievable, right?
Love that.
But
yeah.
then you went through like the different eras of like Miles McPherson being on the gig, and then Aaron was on the gig.
You can hear their personalities.
You really can. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were all so different.
Yeah.
But somehow it all worked. It was like just a different era with Paramore.
Go ahead and kick it off, Chris. So that question?
Yeah, so my question was to you, how do you keep your character consistent on the road when everybody else's character might be failing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like community is a big part of that, right? Because if we're not in community, it's easy to lose our baseline
Yeah.
for what we know to be our character, right?
Yeah.
Like in times when we're stressed out or when we're running dry, you know, it's so helpful for me to have a friend that says, hey, no, I know your character to be this, and I'm going to reflect that as a mirror to you
Yeah.
so that you come back into what I know you to be, right?
Very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's a testament to how when you're out on the road and you have to focus on your character, but you have all this outside noise coming in.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about an environment that's just hard to be in as a person in general.
Oh, yeah.
You're not in your
Everybody's
everyday.
uncomfortable. Everybody's
Oh, yeah.
And everybody has their own story. They have their own life going on. Everybody has something that is beyond the road. There's a family back at home. There's a spouse. There's this and that and the other, and maybe there's issues off the road.
Right.
And so when you come on the road, it's like, well, I don't just forget about them. And
Yeah.
if you do, then I think it just starts to show up in the personality.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing about the road too, like when you start a tour, it's almost like high school all over again.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
What is it called? A fish camp where you're like a ninth grader?
Yeah, totally. Like you're showing up to day
Get
one.
on the bus.
Yeah.
literally.
And there's like 80 other
Here's
people.
your homeroom buddies.
Yeah, you just met them for the first time, and you're like, I'm big stuff with my drums, you know?
Yeah.
Like you're trying to prove yourself in that environment for a lot of us, you know? And so it can really take you out of your own character if you're not having that grounding of who am I and what am I worth outside of this?
Talk about that, because I know that you have a very strict way of balancing
Yeah,
the road and then the home life.
yeah.
Like some of these I guess you would call them vacations, right? But they're like 3 or 4 days that you come off the road. Like, talk about that, because I feel like nobody does that.
And you just recently got married, right?
I did.
Last year.
A little over a year
Congratulations.
ago.
Yeah.
Congrats
yeah,
on that.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Yeah. So as you add more to life, there's more boundaries that are needed, right?
Yeah.
That's
You
something
know?
I'm struggling with right now. I'm not going to lie.
Right.
I'm the first one to
Yeah.
Yeah. he said it today, actually.
Yeah,
Really?
I need to learn how to tell people, hey, man, I can't because I'm a people pleaser.
Right.
You know, and I'm like, oh, Chris is, I don't want to make, I promised Elizabeth this and I promised Arturo that. And it's like,
Right.
wait, but what does Chris need?
Yes.
How can I do these jobs correctly? Well,
Right.
I got to say no.
Absolutely. And with every no that we give, we also are making room for good yeses.
Oh yeah,
You
that's a
know?
good one right there. That's a
Yeah.
good. That's a good line. That's a good line. Yeah.
You want to do a behind the kid collab? Sure.
Right. Yeah.
Good note. Good. What was that? One more time. It was.
Yeah. For every no that we give, we're making space for a good yes.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
That's
Elizabeth Chan, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. I mean, I think the bigger thing here is you also have to set those boundaries, and then you look at the repercussions of them sometimes. Because I mean, talk about how you set that schedule up to be able to leave for 3 days, or however you divide that up. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, really, when it comes down to my schedule at this point, so I also work as a counselor. So I'm thinking I've got to maintain consistency for my clients too. And it doesn't mean that I don't have flexibility to tour. That's the beautiful thing about doing counseling in conjunction with being a touring musician, right? I work in private practice, so I do have the ability to block off certain days as long as I have the schedule ahead of time.
Yeah.
But what that also looks like is having to ask for very clear communication, you know? Like, I'm not in a season anymore where I can take the gig that's going like, hey, we really just need someone to fill in and it's tomorrow and we don't really know the details about when you're going to leave yet, or, you know, because I have other work that's going on at home and work that I am just as passionate about, you know?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that I don't love music as much. It doesn't mean that I'm like losing my, you know, my itch for it. It just means that I've learned how to prioritize certain things so that I can make all of it work and not get burnt out.
I love that, because you have to understand, I think coming from that perspective, right, you have to understand what it means to be burned out.
Yeah.
And you have to know that even when you see it in other people, it's like, man, like, you got to have that balance.
Oh, yeah. Because you know what? If you don't draw those boundaries, what comes next is resentment.
Heavy anger.
I tell all
heavy.
my friends who are musicians, like, man, what is it like going on a bus or getting on a plane or touring? I'm like, man, I think touring, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think touring is just a way of saying, hey, we're going to pay you to be uncomfortable and see how you handle it.
Yeah.
You know?
Another good line.
Yeah, there is a lot of inconsistency that happens when you're on the road. And so if you're wanting to stay wholehearted doing it, you've got to maintain that consistency for yourself.
And I think that's the struggle you just see. I think talking about like character, right? So we're looking at how being on the road and off the road. And when you are on the road and you're almost having to be on, it's like, let me just forget all about what's
Yeah.
going off.
Yeah.
And from a counseling perspective, like I would love your opinion on this, is when you see that on the road, do you try to help in a counseling perspective? Like where do you also have to say, okay, like that's that person's responsibility and that is where they have to take it where they need to get it
Absolutely.
taken care of?
Yeah. So speaking of boundaries, that is where I draw that boundary, right? Because I'm thinking, for me, I do counseling work all the days that I'm home, right? And when I go on the road, part of it is being able to draw that boundary to say, it's not my responsibility to show up as a therapist in this environment. You know, I can show up as a friend in this environment, and I could be like, hey, what's going on in life?
Yeah.
And hey, let's talk through it. And the difference there is I'm not therapizing somebody by being like, all right, tell me how you feel and asking these questions. But I'm going like, hey, you know, if someone's coming to me like, hey, there's a situation going on, right? What do you think? I'm going to feel the freedom to tell them my opinion. Whereas in a counseling role, I wouldn't be sharing my opinion at all.
That's important.
Right.
That's strong. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I make a distinction for myself, and that's where that boundary, you know, comes into practice.
And I think you also have to almost like, I guess you take a step back, right, and you put yourself in their shoes and you try to understand what's going on because you're on the road with this person.
Yeah.
And you also want to keep the peace. And I think you even may see that in a lot of TMs, right?
Yeah.
They're just in charge of keeping the peace.
They're a counselor for that camp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, our creative director, Josh, can speak a lot on that because
Yeah.
he's done that.
Yeah.
And he went on the road with Chris. So being able to talk about how that counseling plays such a dynamic role, like how much have you really gone to love when you leave the road for those few days and you go back home and you do that other side of work? Like, what would you say is really drawing you more? Do you come home and you're like, oh man, I can't wait to like kind of come home and like relax, but also be able to work with my clients and like do all these kinds of things? Like, what's drawing you more? Like, what is the longevity? Where are you seeing like 3, 5, 7 years down the road?
I really love both. And I mean that honestly, right? I see both touring and counseling as balancing acts for me, right? Because on the road, you have such a direct access to, you know, you're playing and you're getting an immediate response, right? You play something or you perform a certain way and literally you finish the song and people are clapping. You know how they feel about it immediately, right? And then in the counseling space, it feels so sacred to me. Nobody is watching you other than that client. Nobody's applauding at the end of your session going, woo, good job, you're so cool, you know? Nobody's doing that. But to me, that feels like such a sacred place because here someone is coming into therapy going, I'm ready to do the work. And we can get into the deep stuff there.
Right,
You know?
right. And I think that it would be a perfect way to kick this off. So we have the 5 segments, right? So there's the first one that's called Character Over Chops. Second one is Welcome the Pain. Out of Pocket, In the Pocket, 4 on the Floor, and Just a Drummer. I know we're cutting it short on time. We got like 15 minutes, but like
Yeah.
out of those 5, what do you resonate
Ooh.
with?
I'm just curious by Welcome the Pain.
All right. Bob Barker says we're gonna spin this wheel and we are gonna hit Welcome to Pain. So,
Here come the pain!
what is something that you struggle with when it comes to changing?
When it comes to changing, what is something I struggle with?
Is there resistance? Is there a kind of like I can do this all on my own? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I think one thing that I'm learning recently is, I don't know whether you guys are familiar with the Enneagram. I don't want to bring in Enneagram talk if that's not welcome.
you can bring it all,
Go ahead.
bring anything you like.
I recently discovered, maybe like about 2 years ago, I thought for the longest time I'm an Enneagram 3, right? And I recently realized, no, I'm an Enneagram 8. And part of the 8 is, we're the challengers, but part of our personality and our instincts is to desire control. So it can be really difficult for me to actually admit that there are things outside of my control and to work with the anxiety that comes when I recognize I can't control that thing.
And I mean, I don't know if you add a faith aspect to that, but I feel like that's where I'm at in my life, where there's so much out of control that you're like, I'm so used to having control. Let me just almost take a leap of faith in a direction that I have no idea where this is going to go, but
Absolutely.
I know it's going to develop character.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
learning how to
Right.
be out of control and be okay with it.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
a hard thing.
Yeah. And that's been the biggest movements of growth for me.
Yeah.
And that's what kicks off the next question is like, do you have an experience that you would like to share that is painful in the sense that it produced growth?
Yeah. Gosh. I have several that come to mind, but I'll pick from some of the more recent. I think when you're making decisions for your career, obviously it's not just about what is going to look good on paper, but you're considering your home life, you're considering, whether people are respecting your boundaries, whether they're respecting your time, all of that, right? And I think what has been one of the most challenging things about not being in control of everything and really like trying to prioritize what you feel is right is sometimes that means saying no to what could have on paper seemed like the big opportunity, right? I think at a certain point I had to distinguish, would I rather make everyone else around me proud of me because they thought I made I got the cool gig or I made a cool decision and, wow, her career is really taking off? Or would I rather know that I made a decision for myself that I respect for the life that I want to build?
That's a
Incredibly
big
important.
maturity testament,
Yeah.
and I think you can't make those decisions until you kind of see yourself and you weren't able to do that at one point.
Yes,
What-
absolutely.
That's really cool.
Was there a part in that story where it was kind of like overcoming that pain that made you a better person?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because you can have the ability to feel good being a part of something that you're like, wow, everyone's proud of me. But, it's amazing when you can say, I feel good because I know who I am, even apart from being attached to that gig.
Yeah. Can you? And I think it's funny to me that makes you think of like just being like, can you sit there at night knowing that, man, I'm not playing Madison Square Garden tomorrow,
Yeah.
but what I'm doing, in this lesson or on this computer is going to take me way further down the line.
Yeah.
And being able to see past the big stadiums and
Right.
the arenas and the buses and the private jets and all that. 'Cause that to me, that really hits home because I know for me, like, I wanted all that stuff and God has blessed me with a lot of that stuff now.
Yeah.
But then, like you said, like right now, trying to make decisions like, well, is this gig really like gonna help Chris the drummer or is it gonna help Chris the human being?
Yes. Yeah. There's the willingness to look at the human side of us and consider, okay, while drumming is a big part of my life, it's not everything. And if I'm not taking care of these other aspects of life, if I'm not growing in my own self-identity, if I'm not prioritizing certain things that keep me grounded, then it's not going to be sustainable in the long run.
Burned out.
And
Yeah.
maybe this is kind of a little personal, and you can say I don't want to talk about it, but as far as like choosing a spouse as a drummer and as a high level musician, like that comes with that person being able to sacrifice stuff and you being able to sacrifice stuff. There's times where I've been like, man, I don't need to date right now because I don't know if that person will be able to handle me being gone for 2-3 weeks at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different factors that come into play when you're trying to find the right partner, right? And I should even rephrase that, because it's not about finding the right partner, but it's really about finding who you want to do life with, who is compatible with where you're going, and how can you be compatible with where they're going.
And I think it's so important because nowadays, like, there's this idea that it has to be this cookie cutter type of thing, and like it goes back to like, oh, so and so is going to be really proud of me, or they're going to think that my life is together and I got it all down, and based on who I'm with or anything like that. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, you're doing life together, and you're willing to go through the blows just as much as you're willing to go through the highs.
Yes, absolutely. And you're willing to celebrate one another, and I think that's a huge thing too. Because as musicians, we can get in this mentality of being competitive, right?
Yep.
And kind of like we're in a way trained to fight for our own, because there's so few opportunities.
It's cutthroat though. Let's be honest.
Yeah. And so when it comes to partnership, you're so used to cutting, to fighting for your own, that it can be like, no, don't touch my dream, right?
Oh yeah.
But it's actually like, no, we're in partnership now.
Right.
It's funny you say that because we have a bunch of other guests that are coming on this week, and like I know them, like I'm not gonna name names, but I have friends who've been like, yeah, man, like my wife got 3 jobs so I could go on the road, or my wife, did X, Y, Z, so I could stay home with the kids for these 2 months because the next 2 months I'm gonna be gone.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to find, somebody like that, and also like within yourself to learn how to like, okay, what is a mature sacrifice for, just like you said, like Elizabeth the human or Elizabeth the musician,
Right.
and those are to me 2 different things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think you start to ask yourself, okay, you get into that world of, well, I think I'm ready, right? I think I'm ready to settle down, or I think I'm just wanting a family, or wanting all these things, right? And I've had to think about that recently, and it always just crosses my mind, like, well, will the drums have to go? Like, what do I have? Right?
Right.
That's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
But like, I think, to really put it out there, it's, you have such a love for something, right? Like you start off at such a young age, just falling in love with this thing that just literally resonates in your heart. And for me, it was always just going back to drums. And it's like, okay, no matter what I was going through in life, it was like drums were consistent. So I knew that was something I could always go back to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, talk about a tangible thing, right? And using it for the better good.
Yeah.
And just wanting to produce a better character out of it.
For sure.
And there's all kinds of, I guess you can say, facts out there about how healthy drumming is and what it does for the mind and everything like that. But when it comes down to it, you always have to go back to, okay, I'm ready to settle down, I'm ready to get into a relationship, and you find that balance.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think that they have to be in opposition of one another.
Right.
And I know it can be tricky, and absolutely there's a give and take, right?
Yeah.
But I really believe that what is meant for you will come.
Yes, absolutely.
And it might look like giving away the gig that you thought was going to make your career, But at the same time, even though it might not look like you ever getting that gig again, the thing that is meant for you, the thing that you want as joy in a gig will come. And I have experienced that, right? I've literally seen, okay, that gig, I have to walk away from that gig. But here's what I'm now experiencing. Although it's not that gig, I'm working with people that I love. I'm living in balance. I love getting to be on the road. I love getting to go on that tour bus or hop in that plane, And it's not the same exact gig. It doesn't look the same way. But the feeling that I get from it, absolutely great.
Priceless.
Yeah.
What do you think you played was it the 15th annual CMA Awards? Is that right?
At the 50th.
50th.
Yes.
That's right, yes.
I think it's that one. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. What is that like, having that pressure, being like, hey, like you're the drummer for all these different artists, like,
Yeah.
all right, sit down.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It was a lot, so the 50th annual CMAs that I played, if I remember correctly, we were doing a house band situation. And so there were multiple artists that were joining for that performance.
Yeah.
And it is a lot of pressure. You for a second you really have this thought that runs through your mind of like, this could be the moment where I like really screw up my entire career.
Yeah. Like, can
I lose it
hang
all
on this
tonight.
gig?
Yeah, you're looking out into the crowd, and so when you do the rehearsal, they're labeling all the seats in front of you.
Oh.
So you look out.
Wait,
The
that person's
names?
gonna be where?
Right.
Yeah.
You look out at Bridgestone Arena and you see Dolly Parton, and
Wow.
like she's sitting there, and that person. Oh wow, okay, that
Yeah.
person's going to be on the front row, and so it is intimidating. You're running through all the things that could possibly happen, and considering, wow, okay, I really need to not mess this up, and will my nerves even allow me to know how to navigate around this, right? But I think the thing that I told myself for that particular performance when I sat down is, this right here in front of you, this is fun. Remember that this is fun.
Yeah.
Right.
Were you guys on charts? How'd you prepare for that?
Basically, they just sent the track over, and they were like, hey, here's the arrangement that we want for this.
Were you guys playing with like a click and a guide?
We were, if I remember correctly, we were just playing with a click.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's difficult. All those different artists. There was like, I saw like Darius Rucker
Yeah.
and Jordan Davis
Yeah.
and Carrie Underwood. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's exciting. I mean, is there something right now that like you're working on as far as moving into a new gig or anything that you're kind of like excited for that's coming up?
Totally. Well, right now I'm out with Lady A.
Yeah.
Which has been amazing. And I'm also working with several artists in the CCM scene. So Matt Marr, John Reddick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've been stoked about all of that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Honestly, like I feel like I'm really thankful that I'm in a point in my career where I'm working with people I really, really do love.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, man, going out on the road, we have great conversations. It's a good time.
Yeah.
We're having fun. It's the full gamut.
I feel like a lot of my friends in the industry say that like it takes a while to get to that point where everybody's like, hey, we're just out here to do music. There's no egos involved. And even at the top, like, there's people who are you still got your bad apples.
Yeah.
But I feel like what makes a pro camp is everybody's there to just play the music.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I know we could keep going
I know.
for a very, very, very long time because that was literally
yeah.
one segment.
Yeah.
But is there anything that you would want the viewers to know? You want to plug anything? Is there anything that you would want to share about what you got going on?
The first thing that comes to mind is just, if you have the opportunity, get into therapy. Doing the personal work
Yeah.
Right, put in the
is
work.
really important, And if you're in Tennessee and I don't know you personally, we can start doing therapy.
Love that.
Hey,
Love that.
Yeah.
Well,
Where's the sign up? So I guess
yeah, we'll put the
One-
link. Well, yeah.
One more question. What is the biggest piece of advice that you received in your career and that and that has made Elizabeth Chan like who she is now?
Yeah. I think what I mentioned earlier, so I had a director of a music team that I was on in college tell me, talent will get you the call, but character will keep you there.
Yep, I've heard that before.
I guess that's a good way to end it, but it's not the way that I want to end it.
Yeah,
I want to keep going on that.
yeah.
That is the number one thing that we have just been talking on. I think why this podcast exists.
Yeah.
It is to talk about character,
Yeah.
develop character,
Right.
and
I think Art, we can definitely say that your chops match your character.
yeah, absolutely, and that's
Appreciate
why
that.
you win the. Yeah, we got you.
yeah.
We got you a tea,
Yes.
first tea.
Thank
But
you so
yeah,
much.
we really appreciate your time, like having you on.
Yeah.
Just I know there's an abundant more amount of things that we can talk about, but
It's an honor.
we've-
Thank you for having me.
yes, as the first Nashville guest.
So I guess we can say it. Thank you for watching Behind the Kick with your name.
Elizabeth Chan.
Thank you guys. See you on the next one.